now that we have a player that can move, we should add a little challenge to this game. So we should start by adding the jumping enemies. Let's make a very simple one. I'm going to right click in the hierarchy window, choose create empty. I'm going to rename this game object as jumping enemy, and I'm going to change its position to be 0, then maybe 8, or might be too much, 6, and 0. Okay, let's make sure they are aligned in the Z axis. Okay, so we have the jumping enemy here, and now I'm going to right click, choose 3D object, and this time I'm going to choose sphere. Okay, so it's going to be a very simple sphere like this one. Now we're going to the materials folder, and we want to make a material for that so we can color that enemy. So right click, create material, and then jumping enemy. We're going to change this color to a nice tone of red, okay, maybe a little wineish like this one. Then I'm going to drag and drop and apply to the jumping enemy. Okay, so this is going to look more or less menacing to the player, okay, like this. You might want to make it on a higher position like 8, for example. Okay, and inside the jumping enemy, let's also add a model game object. So right click, create empty, rename as model, and drag the sphere inside that. Okay, so now that we have this jumping enemy, we need to change a few things. First of all, we're going to remove the sphere collider from them. Okay, so you click here and choose remove component. Right, so you have the jumping enemy here. But if we press play now, the enemy is just going to be hovering and it's not going to fall in the player. So we need to add two things. We need to click add component and add a rigid body. Okay, very simple. And we also have to click on add component and add a sphere collider. If you look at the scene window and you look closer at the jumping enemy, you're going to see that the sphere collider is taking the exact shape of the sphere inside it. Okay, you can tell that by these circles that are enclosing the entire model. Okay, but remember, this is in the jumping enemy and not in the sphere itself. Just as we did with the player, this is going to save us a lot of time later. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. Now, if we press play, the jumping enemy should fall in the player, and well, we can even hit it like this, okay, to make it move. But what we want to do is, if the jumping enemy touches the floor, we want to make it jump. Okay, actually, if it collides with anything, we want to make it jump. So what we're going to do is, scripts folder, right click, create, C# script, and this is going to be jumping enemy. Okay, let's hit enter, wait for the compilation to be finished, and once that's done, we need to attach the script to the jumping enemy game object. So we do it like this, or we can even drop in the jumping enemy game object. Okay, let's also move it up so it's going to be a little bit more organized. So I click on the cog, move up, and the jumping enemy is going to be here. Okay, so how do we tell if this jumping enemy just touched anything, it collided with anything? You need to pay close attention to this. If you look at the sphere collider, its trigger is marked as false. If it was true, then we would only be able to tell if we were overlapping elements. But that's not the case. We still want physics to be applied. So we have to leave this disabled so we process collisions. So to check for collisions, we're going to open the script here in the jumping enemy, and we're going to make a new method that is going to be void on collision enter. It means if this method is called, we just entered a physical collision. And as a parameter, we have to pass collision. This is the class, okay, this is the type, and the name of the variable for this parameter is going to be collision. It can still look like that. And we can print the name of the thing we collided with. So we can type debug.log, then collision, then .transform.name. Okay, so just to test. It's important for you to, every time you do something new, if you're not very used, you can just print something to see if the collision is working properly. So if we press play and the sphere touches the player, we print this message, player. And if we get the player outside of it, then it's going to print cube, which is our floor. Okay, so we're able to tell if we're colliding. And by the way, let's get this cube and rename it to floor. Okay, so it's consistent. Now let's save the scene, and let's move back to the enemy to perform the jumping logic. We need to define a variable that is going to be used for the jumping force. Okay, so here in the jumping enemy, we are going to type public float jumping force. And let's set 5F as a default. We're just going to test this out. Okay, so let's save this. And whenever we enter a collision, we want to apply a force in the vertical axis. So we're going to make it jump up. How do we do this? Here, we're going to type this. Get component of type rigid body. Okay, so get component is a method call, and we have to specify a type. So we type the lesser than character with the greater than character, and rigid body inside it. We open and close parentheses, then dot add force. And we need to pass 3 parameters here, x, y, and z. So we're going to pass 0 on x, jumping force on y, and 0 on z. Now, if we save this and we go to Unity, we wait for the compilation to be finished, and if we press play, the jumping enemy is going to fall, okay? And as you see, it's colliding with things, but it's still not applying the jumping force because it might be too little right now. So let's try that again. Let's try using 100 for jumping force. Let's press play, wait for it to fall, and if it falls, as you can see, it's now jumping a little bit higher because we're using 100. So we can use, while the game is running, we can change the jumping force until we find a value that is going to look interesting. Okay, so 200 is too little, 500 might look interesting, but I think there should be more room for the player. So if we use 700, it's going to look like this. Maybe that's too much. So 6. Okay, we are experimenting here until we find a nice value. Okay, so it's looking like this. We should move here, and well, we can't avoid the enemy. So we know that 600 as jumping force looks interesting. Let's stop the scene, go back to jumping enemy, set 600, save our scene, go to file and hit save scene, and we should be able to completely finish this. Okay, if it touches anything, it's going to look like this, right? Now that we did this, we need to do a little interesting logic here. We want to make this enemy to move from the left to the right as well. Okay, once the enemy is almost up, we want to set a position for it to move to. Okay, a random position in the horizontal axis. Let's work on this in the next lesson.